This is the debriefing video for the meeting on December 12th, 2022, which was yesterday. So, normal opening, call to order, invocation and pledge, roll call, approval of agenda, approval of past meeting minutes, treasurer's report, paying the bills, the fire department report, which Alan, Chief Stiles, did mention that there's a change in how they're doing the medical coding to try to cut down wait times in emergency rooms by essentially not getting people there as quickly. And so that is changing things a little bit and changing the call volume down, but there's also some issues with it that are essentially trying to be worked out. And then we had a new firefighter that the board voted to approve, which is great because he's already done his firefighter training and his medical first responder training. So he just has to get used to our equipment, and then he'll be up to speed and running, which will be very helpful. Next, we had our planning commission report and then maintenance and grounds report, which we added, which was new. And so I read that off. Our first public comment, Al Richards had asked what the change in coding was. And so Chief Stiles had gone into that a little bit more about how that's working. And then he'd also inquired, if some of the call volume is going down because of this change, why would we be adding firefighters? And so there's a little difference here. There's all the technical stuff about how they're coding some of the medical calls now. And, there are some unfortunate wait times waiting for an ambulance, and I think I'll leave it that way. And there's some disagreements in the field about that. But also, one of the things here that it doesn't get noticed because there isn't a huge disaster. It's not good to wait for a disaster or to let a disaster happen to demonstrate something either. But the chief ends up covering a fairly ridiculous number of extra shifts where someone else just isn't available. We have 13 firefighters. They're at over 800 calls so far this year. And so that it ends up being a decent number of these shifts that need to be covered. And so he runs a lot extra, right? If someone were in his position and ran like a normal work week type of thing, we'd end up having a huge gap. So we have a decent shortage of firefighters in Dalton Township that isn't noticeable because the gap is covered, and Chief works hard and our firefighters work hard and to make sure someone is going to every single one of the calls, and so that's a gap that we don't want to reveal exists in performance, right? We don't want to have people not arriving to calls. We certainly don't want to get there. And so we do have a shortage of firefighters, and another one adding on is super helpful. And obviously we've been talking about the millage for adding full-time next year as well. And that's why, because there's this gap in us responding to calls or having the personnel, the capacity to respond to calls. It's just not being noticed because our guys are on top of it. So that's essentially the situation as it lays. Next, we had Chris Colley. She had come from Age Well Services. And so she was coming from something else as well and didn't know how quickly she'd be able to make it here. I put the Age Well Services report at the end of the discussion items, but then she had walked into the meeting just a little bit after it began, and so commented in this public comment section because I think she had some other stuff to go to as well. And she talked about all the programs, which Age Well does a bunch of different stuff, so there's quite a bit in there, the most famous being Meals on Wheels, which before, and I think in my first year, I believe the township had contributed to that, and I think in some of the years previous to that, now we've made a change where we're splitting it between snow plowing over the winter through the Living Word Senior Services, and then what was left over we put towards Safe Seniors about pursuing people that scam senior citizens, and Age Well runs Safe Seniors as well. Next, we had our decision items. The 2023 Board and Planning Commission dates went through the meeting dates. There were only 2 adjustments in the Planning Commission for around the Halloween and Christmas season. So otherwise they're as normally scheduled on their respective Mondays and Tuesdays. Next, we have the 2023 holiday dates, and nothing ended up changing in here. It was as it was proposed, but there are obviously some holidays that fall on like a Tuesday, and so we included the Monday off, or Thursday included the Friday off, that type of thing. Those would be, I think Andrea might have them up on the website already. I covered that with her earlier, so if not, very soon at least. Next, we have the land sale request on Russell Road, and this was passed to both use comparables from the realtor, Marilyn Tucker, volunteers for us to come up with comparables on that, which is nice, and then a true cash value from the assessing department as well, which is useful. Next, we have the land sale proposal for East Daniels, and this was put up for a minimum of $10,000 on that property, so we'll open bids on that next month. Next, we had moving the credit limit to $20,000, and this is because we added a credit card for maintenance and included it up to our normal $5,000 limit, but I didn't realize last month I should have included it in the motion that then brings the total to 20. I just assumed that there would be the 5 times 4 brings it to 20, but I had to explicitly include that, and so did that here. Next, we have 2 Board of Review appointments, really reappointments, and we've done these last month as well. But if you do the Planning Commission and Zoning Board of Appeals, or even the Board of Trustees itself and appoint someone to it, you get a certain amount of time to swear them in, and pretty flexible on those in general. It's just before they start doing something. For the Board of Review, the state statute is written up as within 10 days specifically. And so it made sense. My original thinking last month was to have Craig and Wanda sworn in at the meeting that is later today for the Board of Review, because that would just be convenient. They're going to be here anyways. Those types of boards, they're just citizens, right? They're just people that they get paid for a meeting amount, but it's a tiny amount. It's not like anyone's making any real money off of that, or even they're not really incentivized by the money to a large extent. Just they're doing a thing to participate with the township governance, and want to make it as convenient as possible. So I thought that would work out well. I was just ahead of the ball a little too far, so we just did those again. And next, we have the ordinance 2022-09 for rezoning on one parcel that passed. It was 2 residential. Next, we have ordinance 2022-07 for local food sovereignty. We've been discussing for a while, the positives and the negatives and the pros and cons and the possible upsides and the possible downsides of this, and that ended up passing. Next, we moved into our discussion items. First, we did maintenance, grounds, and DPW comparables, or Department of Public Works. And I had messaged a number of different supervisors and city managers and stuff like that to get comparables. Obviously difficult because different places treat things differently. They're responsible for different numbers of parks. Some do sewers internally, some don't. And so it ends up being a mix. Nate, the supervisor that we have here for maintenance, he talked about the different things that he does. And then Alan, the fire chief, had talked about being useful, getting a real supervisor there in place to start taking care of some of these different things. And it makes sense to do it as part of the quarterly budget adjustment in January if we're going to switch it over to a salary position to also adjust the number at that time. Now, obviously, that can be debatable all over the place, right? Everyone could have a different number in their head and probably do. And so I kind of wanted to work over that. We had budgeted about $36,000 this year for the full-time position. Figure increasing it by a few $1,000s would probably make sense. I'd made a reference to the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which has a part in it about the answer to the ultimate question of the meaning of life, the universe, and everything is 42, and it's getting close to that number, and I brought it up, and Carrie knew the reference as well, so brought up 42, and so we're thinking about somewhere in that range right in there. It could be verbally adjusted in the January meeting, but I think I'll probably put that in as part of the quarterly budget adjustments. Next, we have eliminating the ORV registration, and so I make up these packets, and then I scan them through so that we have the electronic version generated as a PDF, so I can get it posted on the website. Andrew posted on the website now, and then we're posting them on Municode as well for the links. Working on getting the ordinances updated through them. The general code of ordinances should be published soon. The zoning is a little further behind. It's taken much longer than I was hoping, because then I want to tackle redoing the website itself. Nevertheless, so that every now and then, I think we had this happen once before, so not bad over a couple of years, but it missed one page on scanning, and I tried to go through and count the pages and then scroll through it and make sure everything was in there, but I missed one, and it was just my briefing on the ORV ordinance, and it was I included the entire ORV ordinance in the reference packet that's also posted as well. My briefing on it wasn't in there. But the basic situation is a few people, I believe, were concerned when we were first passing this, me as well, about the liability issue with the township or on the individuals. A guy had recently emailed me to follow up with that, and I said I would inquire. I inquired with the lawyer, and the lawyer's recommendation was to actually stop registering them, and which, my perspective, I thought it probably makes sense to stop registering them because it really doesn't serve a function. But I didn't know if, because the registration is also a waiver for liability, if that would put us into a situation where we were liable. But the lawyer said no, for liability, he would recommend not doing it as well. So we'll work on probably adjusting that, bringing it to the board meeting next month also. The board was comfortable with that. Next, I had written on here the cemetery ordinance, and I didn't include anything in the packet. I'm always keeping a list of things for next month, and I've lists of what could be on the agenda for the next few months, because I always have to be working a few months out, try to plan for that type of stuff. There's always a bunch of important stuff coming up, and I like to keep a list of problems. That's what I'm trying to tackle and keep up with. And so we've had issues in the cemeteries with getting people buried, and we don't have an option to switch it to a different company, so it ends up being this problem, and I would like to get sorted, but I haven't really been able to get it sorted, so I had it on the list and forgot to eliminate it, because I talked with Tracy about it, and she was like, I'll probably look at that maybe closer in the spring, something like that, eliminate it. I didn't eliminate it, but I mean, that's essentially why it ended up on there. And so we didn't talk about it when we got down to that, because I was flipping through the packet and we didn't have a briefing on that. Next, we have the real estate bidding escalation clause. And we talked about this, and even if we change policy to say there is no escalation clause, and you could say there is an escalation clause and put various rules. It has to be every $100, every $1,000, whatever you want to do. We can include rules, but the reality of the situation is that when I slice open the envelopes and pull it out, I do not know what I'm pulling out. Someone can write anything they want in there, and so we still have to know how we're going to deal with one if it comes through. And Carrie talked about taking the top number. Obviously, they're willing to bid up to that amount. And so I'll bring it to the board next month to make an adjustment in the policy where we're saying there aren't escalation clauses, but if you put in an escalation clause, then we're just going to treat the top number like the number for the bid, and that can essentially, hopefully, significantly rule out this type of intricacy where there could be game playing with that. If this person increases this amount, or if this situation, then this occurs, and remove some of that potentiality, hopefully, and just make it simple. It's the highest number you put in there. Next, we talked about road projects. There were a number of different things talked about here of allocating funds, maybe because a lot of the chip sealing has been done on the paved roads. If other people want some of the dirt and gravel roads paved, obviously they need to go out and someone has to take the initiative to get a petition to get that process started. And because there's going to be a special assessment, a tax on the people along those roads, the road commission had recommended to me that it might make sense on some of the dirt roads up by the lakes because they're relatively small roads and there's a decent density of population in the area, but obviously it would take someone with the initiative to go out and get a decent percentage, right? Because you have to have 51% legally for a petition for doing that. But the road commission is not even going to drop numbers if you only have 51%. So you're probably going to have to get over 75, 80, maybe more. The last petition we had come in, and this is on a portion of Central Road, I believe is 92% of the people along there had signed it. And so that makes a lot of sense. That makes everyone feel like they're not going to waste time in trying to put together paperwork and having the road commission send out engineers to assess how much work is going to be done, and then nothing's going to happen and everyone just wasted a bunch of time and money on this thing. And so if people want to do that, that's of course on their initiative. And then it doesn't really make sense for the township itself to tackle that because we'll eat up our entire road budget paving a little portion of a paved road and then not be able to allocate anything to other dirt and gravel roads, even the ones that people pass through, and so they get more traffic, which means that the the road commission won't match anything because that's what they do on those types of roads. So then no money would be going into the dirt and gravel roads, which obviously would not be a good situation. The road commission on its own will manage the major roads, the highways and the expressways, and the A1 roads. But it makes sense for us to contribute money and them to match, and that helps out quite a bit depending on which road it is. So we talked about that. Renee had asked about Michelinda. Now that came along, and we've had some complaints, but basically about paying for it, about the finances of it. And then we've had some compliments as well, or thank yous, gratitude from people saying thanks for being willing to go through the process of having this happen. And so that's great. The lines aren't put on it yet. I don't know when the road commission is planning on doing that. There was a little graffiti that someone in the middle of the night apparently went out and spray painted some stuff on there. That's unfortunate. I think someone tried to paint over it to try to eliminate that to some extent at least. The railroad projects went well, and so obviously came out well. The one in Riley-Thompson is nice and smooth, and so there were some compliments on that, which were good. Obviously, the signs ended up being a bit of a fiasco trying to get those, and we never did get the company to pick up all of them. Nate went out and picked up some that ended up being left, and put a decent amount of time into conversations trying to get those picked up. So that's where that is. Next, we talked about the Spark grant, and Christy had taken the initiative because everything that is done takes human initiative. So it takes someone stepping forward and saying, "I want to do this thing," and so she'd taken the initiative to look into this more, and then talk with Fleece and Vandenbrink about what it would take, because you have to have architectural plans to apply for something like the Spark grant, which is money coming down from the state for parks. And she had it inquired into Beagle Field. Obviously could use a ton of work out there. It's the busiest field, most active for sure. And the cost came back of doing all the paperwork and the architectural drawings and that type of thing of $15,000. So certainly a big cost up front on a maybe, and there was various discussion about this. And if it gets covered, if the township were to get it, then that portion is reimbursable through that amount. But if it doesn't come through, then you just spent $15,000 to do an application that you didn't get. And so that's where that is. Christy did mention that there should be letters of support from the community. So if people are in support of this, they should make up some letters saying that how they use Beagle Field, how it's useful, how it would be nice to have a better pavilion or a better building, a better bathroom. That's certainly a thing out there because there's a vault toilet out there now, which has been trouble since I've been here, but also before, of course. And then Lee had mentioned that he would like to hear from the public as well, and I mean the letters of support are obviously on the good side, but are there people against also? Because I think he has the same hesitation that I do. He'd asked about what are the odds that it gets approved. You're laying out a decent amount of money on a maybe, which you can't be sure on. So is that really a good allocation of funds? Ends up being the question. Next, we have the enforcement ordinance, and obviously we've gone through two versions of the resolution since I've been in on trying to make it very explicit that we have a due process and that we're using the due process. And I think it's been working pretty well. There could be adjustments because if we pass one, it'll be right through the Board of Trustees for the Code of Ordinances, and then it'll go through the process of the Planning Commission and then come back to the board to go into the zoning. And so technically they could come out a little differently. Nevertheless, I think it's important to get in there. And I discussed, essentially, it worked as a good reminder in that we had McCabe he's always harassing some municipality over something and has been doing it as far as I've heard from other governments and whatnot for decades, and which normally is a side I support, and I have because I put a ton of time into this, to talking with him about different issues and generating reports and giving him information and this type of thing. But as it turns out, he likes to play things close on whether he is legitimate or not legitimate for tax exemptions and things like this. It's hard to tell. He files paperwork that you can't review his property unless you give 45 days written notice, which basically stops the assessing process and all of these types of things. And so, since he didn't get his one tax exemption, what he decided to do was to try to apply coercive pressure to me by saying that he's going to go around and report for building and zoning and the Court of Ordinances, anyone that might be associated with me, because he's going to start policing the township. And so but obviously strongly implied in there is unless I apply pressure to assessing to give him the tax exemption that he wants. That obviously crosses a moral line into, reporting people like that out of a version of resentment, very bad psychology. And so it's a great reminder about the danger of some people like that and how they're going to try to use the government and even the laws, which is huge corruption of what the laws should be about protecting rights, right? They're going to be this huge use of the laws directly against that in an attempt to harm people. And so that's why due process is so important. That's why it was in the Magna Carta in 1215. That's why due process was used for the first time explicitly in a version of the Magna Carta in the 1300s, is because you can't just hurt people just because. And in this way, especially if you have too many laws, you can get someone like McCabe that wants to turn everyone in to hurt them, to try to force someone else to get his way type of thing. And so there should be a protection from those types of things, right? Which is important. That's why due process is just very important. It's one of the foundations of civilization itself, right? How do you work out violations? How do you work out disagreements, right? This is the part of the genius of, going all the way back to the Charter of Liberties in 1100, right up through the American Founding Fathers, right? Very, very important stuff. So a great reminder on that. I'll work on drawing those things up, and we'll get moving on that process as well. And then we're back around to the Age Well Services report, and I just went over that there had been 10 cases for senior scams that have been turned in and investigated. 7 of those have been closed, and 3 of them are still pending. So that allocation of funds is doing something. Obviously, they don't share the details of those investigations. Next, we have our second public and board comment session. I had mentioned that Lexi had taken it upon herself, one of the admin assistants here, to organize a Super Thursdays, and soup, right? Playing words in there. And that was different people in the township had brought in different soups on Thursdays. I was not one of the chefs, not one of the cooks. You probably don't want me to be. But I had participated, and you could donate money. And then that money that they used, her and our other admin assistant, Andrea, they had coordinated finding a family to sponsor with Christmas gifts, and then went and delivered those and everything. So definitely a good initiative that they followed through with. Then we had a public comment from Al Richards. He had mentioned that the $15,000, he didn't like seeing money allocated to begging for money from the state, in an overall program that he disagrees with the grant system, which I do as well. So he didn't like that, especially if it's coming from ARPA funds. Then it's this type of money you're getting from the feds trying to apply it to the state. Not sure if that can be done anyways. And then he mentioned that he wanted something followed up with the prosecutor. And so I sent that information on. He had already talked to the prosecutor about it. I sent the information on and followed up with it, had a phone call about it, and it went decent. It didn't, the prosecutor's probably not going to follow up with it. We had that, and I communicated that back to Al to let him know. But he said that was essentially being a good public servant on my part, and he respects me. And I do appreciate the feedback. The positive feedback. I don't inquire specifically into positive feedback as much as I do to negative feedback, right? Because I have to attempt to tell where I'm going off the rails. But there is a lot of negative feedback and a lot of different types of attacks. We got the coercion thing going on right now, right? As a perfect example. And I try to really appreciate all of that negativity because it can help keep you in line in some way, or just like this as a reminder of how things can go bad, right, as far as the enforcement ordinance goes and why it's important to keep in place. So all of that can be positive, but it is nice to receive the positive feedback too, and it's obviously a mix. It's going to be, right? We have 9,427 people by last census in Dalton Township. That includes people in the village. And 6,889 parcels, so a lot of different pieces of land, and you're trying to represent all of that, and it's difficult. But when people want to do something like that, and Al and I, he came in, we had a conversation, we had a debate where we disagree about some of the ARPA funds and that type of thing, and I wanted to go into more. And if anyone else has anything like that, and they want to sit down, have a conversation, have a debate, whatever they want to have, we can do that. Stick it up on YouTube. I like that type of participation. I think that's important, right? To have the conversation, essentially. And so, but I appreciate that comment. And then we had the full Spark grant in the reference packet and the information about that. The East Annuals, comparables, the ORV ordinance was in here, the enforcement resolution I included in here, the second one, and then an essay from John Adams, an essay on man's lust for power, which talks about self-deceit. He refers to it as self-deceit at times as well, which is very good. It's 2 pages. It was never published, and it's what John Adams says he based his entire career on. He's trying to tackle this lust for power, which I think is very important. So that is then the entire meeting in its shorter version, I guess. If anyone has anything good, positive, or negative, or indifferent, if you would like, feel free to give me a call. My direct line at the office is area code 231-332-6700, or email supervisor@daltontownship.org. Otherwise, this is Jeff Martin signing off until next time.